Hey, Sheila.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
Sound good?
Yes, I know who I am!
Did IQs just drop shot while I was away?
I have a plan. I like this shit.
You know, it's exciting.
Dance off, bro.
It is your
Me and you.
destiny.
Welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection podcast.
Let the games begin.
Hello and welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection with Jason and Lee. I'm Jason.
I'm Lee.
And today we're going to be closing out Season 1 with Episode 20, our retrospective on Paul Thomas Anderson by talking about his latest film, Inherent Vice. Before we get into that, I want to check in with Lee. How are you doing, sir?
Great, man. Absolutely. I was actually sick last week, and I've got over it.
You're sick a lot.
So, I'm a pasty white guy from Ireland where it constantly rains. In my day job, I'm touching like application forms for like a pension scheme all day. So who the fuck knows where they've been? There's so much that could be written, and I don't care enough to like wash my hands or something in between folding paper and shit like that. So yeah, I get sick. What of it?
Well, I'm glad there's an ocean separating us. That's one of it.
But yeah, no, I'm good.
Well, we've been away for 2 weeks, and the reason why we've been away for 2 weeks is because I tweeted out, I said that I had real life things to take care of. So if you're going to blame someone for postponing, it's my fault.
Yeah, I already know. I blame you all the time.
There you go. Yeah, but that's it. No, I mean...
But that's good, because I there's so much I want to give to this show in terms of research.
Right.
That like our weekly turnaround isn't working. So that's why I'm kind of thinking for the future, like we've been talking about it, doing maybe episodes every 2 weeks, where we can sit and research. Yeah, like in the short term. Maybe we'll change our minds later down the line. But, certainly for now, we'd like to see how it goes 2 weeks at a time. Because, I mean, we already make close to 2 hour long episodes each time. And I don't know about you, but I if I see an episode that's 2 hours long posted by people every week, there's no way I can keep up. I don't listen. I can't. I listen to one episode every month, basically.
Yeah.
But I realize we're not getting any better at shortening episodes. So why don't we improve, like,
content
in the episodes, Yeah, like really go at it. Finally have sex on tape. I mean, that's great.
I didn't want to mention it, but you went out and did it, so that's all right.
I already said it. I couldn't go back. But yeah, so I hope it shows with today's episode, because like for the first time ever, I wrote like essay pages about what I wanted to talk about.
Oh no, I've left my imprint on Lee.
I know, exactly, But if you go to the early episodes, I won this show. I wrote about 5 words for Captain America and like zoned out while Jason talked for a while, and then came back and agreed. So like I've been steadily writing notes more, and especially with the Paul Thomas Anderson stuff, it's unavoidable. You have to come in with something. And this time, by the end of the fucking retrospective, I've adopted his print a sheet out and fucking have
notes. Yeah, have bolded. Notes. Just to make sure you hit those marks.
It's been a transition as far as knowing how to present your thoughts.
Yeah, what I realized though is that I don't want to have a strict schedule. We're not going to try to surprise you guys, and if we do decide to put out a show once every 2 weeks, or if we're going to go back to a weekly thing, we'll tweet it out. You guys will be the first to know anyway. So anyway, we're going to leave you guys on that with regards to what we've been up to. And we were supposed to have JD Duran from In Session Film to come talk Inherent Vice with us. We were caught up in scheduling conflicts. We couldn't necessarily get it to work, and we felt, kind of sad to not have him on the show. However, he had offered to send us an audio clip of his review of Inherent Vice, a little bit of what he had to say about it. But it also spurred an idea of mine where I decided to actually reach out to our community of people, just a few people that I've wanted to be in contact for quite some time, as well, and give us a chance to kind of really form, I'll call it a communicative bond with these individuals. And so we're...
I mean, like, we already, like, we follow these people, we read their stuff anyway, but we want to involve them more because, we like reading their stuff.
I have a great time. I mean, there's a few people out there that we're going to mention right now that we hope will become people that we have on the show regularly, because we really appreciate their opinions. And so
Absolutely.
JD is going to be one of the first audio clips we play. Then we're going to be talking about Neil Ramji, who's from Film Seekers, brilliant guy. And we also have Andrew from the AB Film Review and the Last New Wave from Australia. And we have Hermione Flavia from Wildfire Productions, who writes reviews for her blog as well. So before we get to the audio clips, I really think that we should mention that we know Inherent Vice is a very divisive film. So back in 2014, when the film came out, this was actually one of the first reviews that I decided to write for Film Faculty. And I'll just go back to my review so I can give you an idea of just how complex the story can be, even though the plot is secondary to the characters. And so what I had said, walking out of the film, I was with my girlfriend, who's still my girlfriend now, a lovely human being, hates the film. And she asked me, why the fuck did you take me to see this piece of shit movie? And I decided to sit down and write what was one of my first reviews for Film Faculty. And I started like this. And I'll just read verbatim what's there. You guys will be able to go back on Film Faculty to read it if you want. And I essentially say that the opening shot of the film is two houses that are separated by a road that leads to an inviting beachfront. And I say the shot foreshadows the divided opinion people will have about Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice. The voiceover starts, sortilege. Doc, Sportello's assistant, described Doc's ex-girlfriend, Shasta Faye Hepworth, as though she were describing a contemporary hallucination of a past memory. Shasta hires Doc, a pot-smoking private investigator, to keep her current boyfriend, Mickey Wolfman, a real estate supremo, safe from the FBI and his wife who wants him committed. After Doc realizes that Wolfman is actually missing, he investigates the web of Wolfman's connections that weave a heroin cartel, a warring biker gang, a drug lord / dentist who's trying to seduce an heiress, all of whom lead back to a corrupt cop whose dead partner had connections to the cartel, and a bunch of other characters that add more confusion to Thomas Pynchon's muddled mess of a stoner neo-noir set at the intersection of hippie culture and of modern capitalist society.
That it's still true. It's all still true, which is great. You know, like, and that's the thing. Cards on the table. I'm going to be quite positive about talking about this film.
I will too.
And I totally agree with you. That's the thing. Like, you're not even remotely wrong, which is what I find so funny about this. I'm really looking forward to talking about this and listening to our listeners,
right?
Our buddies in the film community who are going to chime in, because there's such a wide variety of opinion. That's super fun to me. I love when we can get stories that do that.
Butt heads, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let's get to the audio clips first, because I really want to talk about. I really want to get to what we have to say, but also I want to just show you just how divisive that film is. Just that the opening shot, that what I'm talking about. You know, just that walking down to the beachfront, you have these two buildings, one on one side and one on the other. That divided opinion is amongst the people that have sent us the audio clips.
Definitely.
So let's play JD Duran from In Session Film.
Hey guys, it's JD from In Session Film. I'm sorry that I couldn't be on this particular episode. I really wanted to join you guys for discussion on Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice, because I love and adore this film. It made my top 10 of 2014. And I'm not exactly sure where it ranks for me with Paul Thomas Anderson, but I really dug the hell out of this film. I think it's very funny. It's got a really interesting narrative that is simultaneously confusing and convoluted, but thematically very rich all at the same time. In fact, I think a lot of that convolution and that confusion that people will experience on the surface is purposeful. I think it's meant to parallel this disillusioned drug trip that our main character of Doc, as well as other characters in the film, are experiencing. And I think by constructing the film in that manner, it only makes the film more immersive to me. On top of that, Paul Thomas Anderson does a great job of creating a 1970s vibe with the art direction of the film, the costumes, the music, the lighting, and the framing. It is all spectacular. The craftsmanship of this film is as good as you would expect from Paul Thomas Anderson. Joaquin Phoenix is hilarious in this film. I think he gives a really great performance, as well as Josh Brolin. I think the dynamics and the chemistry between the two are so wonderful. And additionally to that, you have a great coming out party by Catherine Waterston as the Shasta character, who is terrific in this film. She doesn't have a ton of screen time, but when she's there, she packs a punch that I thought was quite terrific, especially when you get to more of the intimate scenes later on in the film between her and the Doc character. And I think ultimately the reason this film resonates so heavily with me, on top of what Paul Thomas Anderson brings to it in terms of his direction, is what he brings to this film thematically and what's underneath. Because, I feel like a lot of people criticize the film or got caught up in what people were experiencing on the surface. Maybe they didn't laugh or find the humor all that great, or maybe they got caught up in the chaos of the mystery of this film and all of the confusion that comes with that. And again, it's not about the mystery for me, but I do think there's more to it than that. I think a lot of the characters in this film are searching for something, whether that be love or purpose, or maybe it's just the next drug to get them by. But I do feel like a lot of the characters in this film are searching for something, which is really interesting when you juxtapose that with this idea of escapism via drugs and physical pleasure that we see throughout the movie. But with the Doc character especially, every action he takes ultimately points back to this idea of reconnecting with the Shasta character. And while that does get very funny at times, there are moments in this film where it gets dramatic and it gets really serious, which of course PTA plays with and always somehow brings a laugh out of even those moments. But I still think there is a dramatic urgency to this film that you can read into the Doc character. And I really like that. I think that couples very well with the humor of this film and what we see on the surface, that thematic undercurrent, that idea of searching for something among the chaos. I think there's a real dramatic resonance with that underneath this film that I thought was really quite interesting. And I would go as far as to argue that in a lot of ways, this is one of PTA's most romantic and intimate movies when you boil it down to that idea and how that plays into the Doc and Shasta character. There are some really quiet and really intimate moments that I really enjoyed on top of everything else. So I love Inherent Vice. I love PTA and what he's doing in this movie. I think this is a little bit of an underrated film. I think it was criticized a little too heavily, if you ask me. I think this is a great film. I love it. I would give it a grade of an A, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of Paul Thomas Anderson. Thanks, guys, for letting me drop by for a few minutes or some extended minutes because it's me, but I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the show.
All right, so that was JD Duran from In Session Film, and as you guys can see, he was actually quite positive about the film.
Yeah, obviously. It was one of his top 10 of that year. So, I mean, obviously, there was an emotional resonance there with him.
Yeah, so he had a positive reaction to the film, and it shows. But now I want to show you guys just the opposite side of the spectrum by playing a clip from Andrew from the AB Film Review and The Last New Wave.
Hi guys, Andrew here from AB Film Review and The Last New Wave. My thoughts on Inherent Vice, Paul Thomas Anderson's last film, is that it's a film that I just don't get. I'm a big fan of Paul Thomas Anderson. Magnolia is my favourite film ever made. I think it's a brilliant film. However, the performances in Inherent Vice are brilliant. It's just the story that is working on a different level than I can comprehend. And it's one which I don't know if I'll have the patience to revisit because I just didn't connect with it on initial watch. And its 2.5 hour runtime is probably a little bit too much for me to want to try and investigate this again. And I understand it's a film that gets better on repeat viewings, which is fine if you have the patience for that. Unfortunately, there just wasn't enough for me to want to grip onto and investigate even further. That said, Joaquin Phoenix is brilliant, as per usual, and the supporting characters are fantastic as well. There is a lot of comedy within this film that works really well. It's just not one for me. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Inherent Vice. That said, I do think that Paul Thomas Anderson is still the best filmmaker working today. Thanks again, Andrew from AB Film Review.
Now, as you've heard, Andrew didn't necessarily like the film at all. I think there's a few parts that he would, if we, on further investigation, maybe talking with him a little bit, if we point out some stuff, Andrew would be like, oh yeah, I like that part. But overall, he was like, is this something I'm going to revisit again? No.
Yeah, exactly. You got the impression that, he liked it for the parts that were in it, but as a whole film,
yeah, it's like
it just lost him entirely. Yeah. And that's great. That's hilarious.
Yeah. And let's weigh that against another negative reaction. Neil Ramji from Film Seekers. So here you go.
Hi, my name is Neil Ramji. I'm from filmseekers.com and I've been kindly invited to join Jason and Lee to give my thoughts on Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice as part of their retrospective podcast season. So, where do I start? Well, it's often been said by champions of Paul Thomas Anderson that his films require multiple viewings to experience the subtle textures and little nuances. And in the case of a film that had any form of cohesion the first time round, that would be absolutely fine. It would be almost a joy. However, Inherent Vice for me was nothing of the sort. It's 2.5 hours of confusing, frustrating stoner musings of a man going from encounter to encounter, picking up vague information on an equally unclear case that completely wipes out what you've learnt in the previous scene. It's a slog and a bore, and the fact that it's lauded as a masterpiece or has some sort of directorial significance annoys me all the more. P.T. Anderson's previous works are all of an extremely high calibre, and anyone who can make Adam Sandler in a film appear as a credible actor already has my goodwill. Inherent Vice hates its audience, and the fact the source material of Thomas Pynchon was deemed barely scriptable in the first instance makes me wonder why this was brought to screen so faithfully. At least there's some consistency here with the sound. I mean, the music fades in and fades out, the dialogue is barely legible or cohesive, and if it weren't for the affability of Joaquin Phoenix's Doc, you'd be hard-pressed to actually stay for the whole 148 minutes. Its gender politics, although of the time, are woefully poor. Women in Inherent Vice are used as just mere tools of seduction and completely objectified. And while there is respect for women, none of them ever have meaningful conversations other than to raise the sexual libido of the main character. If you look at a similar film like Richard Kelly's 2006 Southland Tales, the results are almost identical, where reason and narrative falls away, substituted with farcical comedy, and you're just left with a sprawling mess. And this is held aloft as some sort of flower power tribute to the Stone Age because it absolutely makes no sense. It's a load of old tripe. Pretty and wonderfully soundtrack tripe, but tripe nonetheless. In my mind, the remit of a film is to entertain, enthrall and intrigue. And this just serves a self-important flagellation of which P.T. Anderson doesn't even have a clue what's going on. Incoherent Vice was edited as a trailer of pratfall, swooping crane shots and even a reference to The Last Supper. In reality, all it is a drug-addled party where you haven't taken any drugs and it's no fun at all.
There you have it. Neil flat out hated the film. And
he doesn't want to give it the time of day. That's what's funniest to me. Like he doesn't even want to hear if there's a positive side to this argument. He's just like, I don't want to people hailing this hippie bullshit as some fucking godsend masterpiece. Yeah. He doesn't want to have any part of it. That's fucking hilarious.
I hadn't noticed what he brought up about the female characters used as these women that are basically like at men's mercy throughout the entire film. I hadn't seen it like that because I mean, if you look at Reese Witherspoon's character, she's actually a lawyer. She's in an office, but she actually wants to go down to she tries to inhale hippie culture as much as she can, even though she judges it, right? So I don't know. I think that there are certain women in there that do have agency.
That's a fucking perfectly lobbied criticism of the film. I think that's a great thing that for somebody to point out like straight away. At least Neil pointed it out, so I mean we got that.
And that's it, which brings us to Hermione Flavia, and let's see how she felt about the film.
Hi, this is Hermione Flavia from WildfireMotionPictures.com, where I talk about making movies and write reviews and movie news. Inherent Vice is Paul Thomas Anderson's 70s set LA crime film in which a Dennis Hopper-esque Joaquin Phoenix stars as Doc Sportello. It's part Philip Marlowe, part Leaving Las Vegas, and has the 70s styling from the clothes to the music and decor. In tone, it's kind of sweet and sexy, clumsy and funny, even though it takes in quite a lot of drug use, violence, kidnapping, cults, and a number of other serious themes. It never really becomes bleak, but nor is it a straight comedy. The humor often comes from Joaquin Phoenix's Sportello, whose drug-induced haze means that he never really responds to the strangeness around him. He's just kind of a confused guy. And yet, he is slowly getting to the bottom of the case. And slowly may be the operative word at 2.5 hours long. It's an odd film from Paul Thomas Anderson, who gave us There Will Be Blood, Magnolia, and The Master. It's not quite like any of these films, which appears to have annoyed some fans of There Will Be Blood, who are perhaps hoping for more of the same. Adapted from a novel by Thomas Pynchon, who is reported to love the film, it feels more like an immersion in someone else's world or their reality than a thrilling mystery, but it's a film with many little delights and a lot of weirdness. Just let go and enjoy it.
And there you have it. Hermione actually liked the movie quite a bit.
Yeah. Generally positive, and maybe not as high on the spectrum as JD, but overall didn't hate it. That's pretty good.
No. And then she actually points out something really interesting at the end there when she says that it's a movie that you should rather experience. It's not something that you're supposed to really... Absolutely. You have to let yourself go into the film. It's not something that you're going to just get a lot from. If you just sit there, you're not going to enjoy it. But she's just saying, let it all in. Just take it in as it is.
Absolutely. That's so true. That's something, again, I'll be kind of touching on is how I experienced the movie. I think it's a little more like how Hermione experienced the movie.
Right. It's kind of funny. I'm glad that you pointed out that you see it a little bit more like Hermione. I clearly like the movie, but I'm not in Hermione's camp either. But yeah. you know me. We were texting about this, and you had mentioned to me your analytical mind. Being my analytical mind must have a nightmare with this fucking thing.
Yeah.
Because there's no way in. But I found a way in.
At the cost of your energy and well-being, you can dig a hole and work around. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think for me, as much as I want to enjoy anything that is Pynchon, I didn't take pleasure in watching it.
Yeah.
I had a good time trying to dissect it because that's what I like doing.
I think that's the smartest indication, first of all, before we even get into any sort of discussion about what we like and don't like about the film and how it's made. Right off the bat, if you watched it and you enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, that is the right impression, I think you're entirely right to have watched this once and said I didn't enjoy it, and to say that's my piece. I think the film makes a good case for saying, yeah, there's more to this, but you have to want that, and if you don't, that's fine, man. You take it or leave it, and it's great that you just go and say, yeah, you know what. No matter what, I don't think I could like this film.
It won't stop me from watching it again and again.
No,
that's the sad thing for me because I'm a masochistic bastard. But
that's because this is kind of our thing, study of film is what kind of drives us, So even the stuff that we don't like has to be looked at. But if you're just a general viewer and you tried to watch this film and it didn't appeal to you at all, don't feel embarrassed to say I didn't get it. Or I didn't like it, because at least you tried. Well, we'll talk about it and we'll kind of break down things that we like and don't like and things that we read into the film. Don't feel like we're trying to sway you.
Oh, God, no. We're not like that.
We're going to say this is what we liked about this film, and you can make your own mind up, maybe based on, and maybe go into it with a little of what we're talking about and think, oh, actually, now that I get that side of things, I enjoyed it more, or, oh, that doesn't change anything for me. With that information, you take it or leave it as it is. It won't really change your general view of the film. And Jason's the perfect catalyst for this because digging deeper didn't change a thing for him. And he's, more than anyone I know, would be ready to jump on the chance to love Anderson's work. So, I mean...
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100% right with that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that's important before we get into it, to clarify that this is just discussion.
Yep.
It's interesting notes that we found in our separate takes. We both took a different vibe from the film that we're going to explore in our own kind of way, but you don't have to agree, and you probably won't, and that's cool. That's fine too. But obviously we're always interested in hearing what you got from the film and stuff like that, and we'd love to hear that as we go along. If you agree with us or found something totally different, or you just hated it, that's what's great about these comments, and what's going to be great about, I think, what we present. What you can gain from that is just, it's interesting.
So on that note, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the trailer for Inherent Vice, and we'll start the discussion or dissection.
Yeah, whatever.
Right after this. Stay tuned.
If it's a quiet night out at the beach and your ex-old lady suddenly out of nowhere shows up with a story about her current billionaire land developer boyfriend and his wife and her boyfriend and a plot to kidnap the billionaire and throw him in a loony bin,
I need your help, Doc.
maybe you should just look the other way. But if you're Doc, it may all start to get a little peculiar after that.
Michael Z. Wolfman.
And Mickey Wolfman.
Mickey Wolfman.
Has vanished.
So where would I find him?
He's technically Jewish, but wants to be a Nazi.
And a girl don't necessarily want to get into difficulties with those folks.
Got a spare picture I could borrow?
Well, maybe you're better off with the Nazis.
Whoa.
Are you all right?
Am I?
Are you? Ordinarily, we're the ones asking the questions. And your question is, which side am I on?
Good question.
Wrong answer.
Choto, Kinichiro, Dozo, Moto Panekeku, Moto Panekeku, Moto Panekeku. Hai, hai, hai. I get you! Don't know much about history.
Doc may not be a do-gooder, but he's done good.
But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be.
Good luck, Doc.
What a wonderful world this would be.
Coming just in time for Christmas.
All right, so welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed the trailer for Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice. The film stars Joaquin Phoenix as Doc Sportello, Catherine Waterston as Shasta Faye Hepworth, Josh Brolin as Bigfoot Bjornsson, Owen Wilson as Coy Harlingen, Eric Roberts as Mickey Wolfman, Martin Short as Dr. Rudy Blatnoyd, and Benicio del Toro as Sancho Similax Esquire.
Of course.
What's her name? Jenna Malone's in there as well, as she's playing a girl that's appropriately named Hope because she's hoping for Coy to come back. So, how do we start this thing? Do you want us to give a definition of what inherent vice actually means?
That is, the film explains it, but for people who are just casually listening, that might help because the title might annoy them.
Yeah. So I looked up the definition. I took a little bit of what was in the film as well.
Yeah.
Inherent vice itself is a law term, meaning it's something that happens to itself. So they use it in marine insurance policy. So it means anything you can't avoid. So something that is going to self-implode without external forces.
Yeah.
So if we break down the meaning itself, is that everything that is created with a flaw that is essentially inescapable.
Yeah, exactly. It's over time deterioration. Think of human beings and our bodies. We eventually die. Think of glass that cracks, fucking carpet that gets torn up. Piles, everything. Batteries dissolve into themselves. Everything has an inherent vice. So it's a good title. It's used in the context of Shasta Faye in the film, but it applies to everything.
Yeah, it is. I think so. And because inherent vice, even if you take it away from the law term that it actually means, you can look at it from different angles, the way that Pynchon usually likes to look at language. The deconstruction of the words. And inherent vice, if you look at the word vice, vice is usually something that's negative, something that's in line with prostitution or drug dealing and something like that, right?
Yeah.
But when he's talking about inherent vice, especially a book coming out in 2009, but then, if he sets it in 1970 anyway, it's a transition film again anyway, I'll say that right away. So it's a transition period from the 60s to the 70s. And essentially, that is where Pynchon has decided to set his film, because those were the years where there was an inherent vice in society.
Sure.
He's not seeing it as a flaw. It's just that because we're going from existentialism to capitalism and trying to mix these two things together, there is not necessarily a flaw, but there's a want to indulge in something that's a little bit more elusive.
Yeah, well, there's a deterioration at least, so...
Of old values.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that needs to be made fresh and new.
Before we actually get to Anderson, I want to talk about Pynchon, but I'm going to talk about Pynchon by quoting Anderson.
Okay.
In an interview with Mark Kermode, Anderson described his film as a film that is about the longing for the past.
Right.
So Inherent Vice itself is a book that deals with entropy. And it's a common theme that Pynchon likes to recuperate. He'll use it in Crying of Lot 49. I think he uses it in Vineland as well. But in Inherent Vice, it's clearly there. It's this spinning spiral of chaos that's going to be, if you knock one thing and then it starts hitting another thing and another thing and another thing, and it just becomes this very chaotic environment.
Yeah.
And essentially what Pynchon likes to do is, in his novels, the search for meaning, what he tries to explain is that it's elusive because there's no meaning to begin with. And this is what he tries to explore in The Crying of Lot 49, where he tries to lump symbols, meaning onto symbols, but the symbols don't lead to any place. They just lead to other symbols, right? So essentially when we're looking at words, we are going to put the meaning onto words, but if you look at the word itself, it's just a jumble of letters, and we have to attribute meaning to that.
Sure.
Now, the problem with words post-World War II is what the Nazis did to them. If you read George Steiner's work, Language and Silence, he explains that euphemism was born out of World War II, and that words were used in a very, very shitty way.
Right.
Okay? If you look at the words final solution, death and murder are nowhere to be found in that, right? So we start trying to interpret what words are. They're used in a euphemistic way in order to kind of con people into believing specific things. Now, what Steiner explains in his work is that the language, the German language anyway, has never really fully recuperated from that. But just imagine what happens once you start translating that language, right? Now we go to English, we go to French, we'll go to anybody that was involved in World War II, and now we have options with words. And so what I think Pynchon tries to do in the novel, okay, and what Anderson will later recuperate for A Longing for the Past with the visual style that he chose to adopt for Inherent Vice, is that Pynchon tries to show that the fundamental structure of words is an example of inherent vice itself. They are born, okay, because we can interpret words. There is an infinite amount of possibilities of interpretation of sentences when we put the words together. Now, when the communication aspect kicks in and the understanding of the individual also kicks in, then you could be stuck with a never-ending cycle of misinformation.
Yeah.
Kind of what goes on in Inherent Vice.
Inherent Vice.
And so this is what's kind of interesting about the book and about the film, is that look at the number of times that information is misinterpreted throughout the film. Just take the scene where Bjornsson calls Sportello and says Shasta is gone. Sportello immediately thinks she's dead. But if you look at the concept of gone, it just means not here.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't imply death, but because when we say we can't deal with death in a normal way, we'll go to George Carlin to talk about euphemistic language. Because we can't deal with death, we'll use a word like gone to just kind of imply she's left us. But then Bjornsson goes and says, no, she's missing. She's gone. She's missing. She's gone. And so Sportello is caught between like trying to interpret what Bjornsson is saying and going like, fuck, stop fucking with me. What are you trying to say? So there's a communication breakdown again between Sportello and Bjornsson. Now, when Sancho goes to get Sportello, so the Benicio del Toro character goes to get Sportello at the police station, again, Bjornsson says he was about to kick Sportello. And so Sancho says, hey, that's assault. But Sportello has to explain to him that kick means he was going to let him go. Kick him to the curb, essentially.
Yeah.
And so we again have this interpretation thing, you can't use that language because if you say kick, that means I can get you on assault for something like that, which goes with the police brutality theme that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But these two things go to show just how strange communication can get just because of how words are used. Another example of that is Sancho in the diner when they're trying to explain that Wolfman, when he tries to explain to Sportello that I'll call him Doc from now on. Doc is the word that wants to come out. So when Sancho tries to talk to Doc about Wolfman trying to start something in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But then he uses an example in saying
Howard Hughes.
He says Howard Hughes with the Italians. Sportello gets lost in the information and he goes, Howard Hughes was Italian?
That's actually, that part, that's a quote I'm going to come back to as well. So
okay, cool.
Keep that fresh in your mind, listeners.
But that's it. So, I mean, there's this, again, a constant misinformation. People are trying to say specific things and they're getting lost. And I mean, if you look at it just look at, if I go to Puck, Puck, if you look at Puck, the word Puck in Shakespeare is a guy that's going to be the guy that in Midsummer Night's Dream that's going to fuck everything up. And then you'll have Oberon that's going to have to try to save the entire day once Puck goes back. But then you have Puck in Inherent Vice who's wearing a swastika on his face. And you're like, we associate it directly to Nazis. But then you'll have the doctor that's with Doc when he sees Puck. And he says, oh no, that's an ancient Hindu symbol meaning that all is well. Which kind of got me thinking about what Nixon tried to do during the 60s when he uses those V fingers and trying to reappropriate the peace sign to see V for victory as opposed to V for peace. And so I think that in this case, when we're trying to piece together a film, and this goes like with what Hermione was saying, if we try to piece together this film, the narrative becomes just this series of interpretations, which kind of brings us down to being kind of like Doc, where we think we're living this weird delusion and watching the movie. And I think that that's Pynchon himself that's seeping through Anderson and showing us in his visual style that the words, what he's trying to interpret, is this loss of language, this misinformation caught at the crossroads of the 1960s and 70s of people that are trying to get along. Mm-hmm. But there's clearly an exchange of information that is not being dealt with in the right way. And so Inherent Vice in and of itself, yes, comes to the culture that you were born with, but it also informs the language and how you're going to be able to communicate with others. And so it becomes just this weird mess. And so I thought it would be kind of interesting to give a little bit of a backdrop of what we're doing with and what Pynchon usually tries to do and when he's trying to shape the words that he actually uses in his novels.
Right.
So that's the way I wanted to start that, by talking about a longing for the past, because essentially what Pynchon is trying to say, and I think what Anderson is trying to say by proxy, Pynchon is longing for a time where words were less complicated.
Interesting.
And I think that that's where it transposes onto Anderson's visual language in the film, which is much tighter than his other film. We talked about Boogie Nights, we were like, it was screaming Scorsese, look at me, I'm a filmmaker, this is awesome. And everything was just so flagrant, right? Yeah. And then by the time we get to There Will Be Blood, it's like, whoa, this is my Kubrick, I love what I'm doing here. But if we're going to go to Inherent Vice as Paul Thomas Anderson's choice film right now, the visual language he uses in this one is actually quite stripped down. Mm-hmm. It's a visual language that actually goes back to the noir phase.
Definitely.
Of the 1930s and 40s, we'll call it gumshoe of the United States, right? Where you'll have like guys like Sam Spade that are going to come in, where you're going to have this voiceover that's going to be there. But it's going to be basically establishing shot, reverse shot, and then you're going to have an establishing shot to end the scene. It's exactly how movies were shot in the 30s and 40s. Yeah, you'll have a little elaborate tricks that are going to be on the screen. Yeah. Things are going to be happening in the background.
Sometimes there's action and it's very pronounced. Sometimes we'll get a whole establishing tale of an area so we know where we are. But yeah, more or less, most of the dialogue and the scenes are very straightforward. 1-2 shot reverse. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
That's it. So I think that he adopted that visual style on purpose. He didn't want to be flamboyant, because if he's going to go with what Pynchon might be doing in terms of words, longing for the past, longing for meaning, right? I think that by stripping down his visual style, his visual language, he's actually paying a little bit of a tribute to what the noir used to be in the 30s and 40s in Hollywood. So it's him going back in time the same way as Pynchon going back in time and setting his film in the 1970s. Setting his book, in the 1960s and 70s.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, we'll get a little bit to what I want to talk about in terms of how the film is shaped as a loop. But that's basically what I wanted to say to begin with. And I think that noir essentially leads us into what you wanted to talk about in terms of postmodernism.
Absolutely.
And noir.
What I want to speak about quickly, though, about what you were saying. Because, like you say, like a stand-up or a homage to these things, from my angle, they were very critical of these things. Like, for example, you say,
sure,
language, that kind of call back to a a time when language was simpler is what you got from it. And what I got from it was due to the postmodern nature, where it's approaching the reality of the fact that language is fluent and varied and critical. It is a sort of denouncement of these proper words, you know, like it's more of an establishment of what really exists in the world, how language really sounds. And
right. But just to riff on what you were saying right there, to me,
sure.
Inherent Vice is an antithesis to The Great Gatsby, because you'll have Gatsby who's trying to, if you look at the last sentence, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. That's off the top of my head, so I'm paraphrasing. I think that is longing for the past. I think that Nick Carraway's character is somewhat like Doc Sportello, and he's reporting what he sees. He's confused. He's the middleman. He's the guy that's stuck in between these two things. And I think that Inherent Vice plays a little bit to that, this longing to the past. So if we're looking a little bit about how Gatsby, when you read The Great Gatsby, the words are pure. They're innocent. They mean what they mean. They have to use the green light as a symbol for Daisy, you know, as the American dream. It's very simple. It's very clear.
Yeah.
But when you fast forward to the 60s, post-World War II, you know, past the Roaring 20s that were a time of innocence, you know, the Jazz Age and stuff like that. But people were still very innocent, even though World War I had a huge impact on them. World War II was much more devastating. And so language has been killed at this point. And if you're looking for a longing for the past, I think that Inherent Vice really speaks to that, where language has gone to a place that it can no longer be recuperated.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think you're right, but I think it's more... I got the impression it was more a denouncement of that, you know? That's what I mean. I feel like, it highlights that there is that longing, but the reality of the scenario is that even with that miscommunication and that the challenge that presents, we still find happiness in that, you know? We still resolve most of our problems. In fact, the man who tries to resolve things, he doesn't. Doc doesn't, you know? He is the guy who just happens to be there while everything solves itself. The world functions without him, without the man at the center of the story, because there is no center anymore. That's very postmodern. So you're looking at a world that functions perfectly fine without that individuality forcing itself on it. And so that sort of nostalgia, that sense of trying to, like, speak up, I can't hear you, that kind of thing that Doc embodies, he's out of place in the real world that now exists, where everybody finds a place and it's a mess, but they're happy. You know, like, everybody kind of gets a happy ending, except the murderous Nazi guy and his drug dealer boss. But I mean, everybody else, even...
Putting it lightly.
Yeah, even Mickey Wolfman finds happiness in a cult, you know, the family gets reunited. Everybody kind of ends somewhere. Yeah. Even Doc settles a little with Shasta Fay. They kind of, even in what they could term as settling, which is not settled, but at least that's something of a bridge towards the real world, where everything is in constant flux. That's postmodernism.
I get it, but look at the last shot of the film.
Yeah.
What's the last shot?
It's in the car with the lighting, the noir lighting in his eyes.
His eyes, exactly. Where do his eyes go?
To the camera.
Nope, they go up to the rear view mirror. Where's he looking?
To the but that's what I'm saying. He is that man, though. That's the point. He's the fault in this story. He is the guy representing those values, but he's not the world that we're supposed to be in healing, you know?
No, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so you're right to focus on that, because this is Doc's problem with the story, is he doesn't fit. So that makes sense, because this is the postmodern world and he's the modernist. He's the guy trying to make finite sense of what's happening.
100% right.
So the rear view mirror, that's right. He's clinging to that, even if he's trying to embrace forward movement. You know, he's in the car driving forward, he's still looking back. That makes perfect sense. Here we go. We're gonna talk a little bit about Inherent Vice, the Neo-Noir, Postmodernist. This is all stuff you've already kind of approached, and you know, we've already hit a bunch of little tick boxes there about what I kind of wanted to say. But I think first, here's the kind of way I viewed Inherent Vice. Okay, it's when I sat down. There's two ways I went about it. One, because with the benefit of not having to see this in cinema, I could pause it at any time. I took this.
Yeah.
When I realized how dense the dialogue was, I never rewound, but I paused kind of semi-frequently just to chill for a bit, because I took it like I take a book. If I'm being constantly barraged with information, I get overworked, you know? Your mind
you need a breather.
Yeah, you need to chill. I mean, it's not the same thing that happened with Seven Samurai. That was just sheer length, you know? That was sheer exhaustion from investing for long periods of time in somebody's journey. This was information overload. If you've seen the film in cinema and you walked away with just feeling like it was too much, I feel there is something to say about taking your time, about watching it slowly and kind of pacing it a bit. It worked for me. I don't know if it works for everyone, but it worked for me more. And from this perspective that we now live in, where it's more readily available to download or to view and stream, like I got to see it on a streaming service, this worked in my benefit, you know. So if we're going to look at stuff we understand about the film, let's break it down really simply. What kind of film is it? What's its genre? Okay, so if your answer was stoner comedy, it's not a wrong answer, but it's I don't know, man. You must have been watching it totally. I mean, it is funny and it's got stoners, but I don't think it's not like a Seth Rogen film. You know, like that's kind of what they do, or where they've ended up. But anyway, so genre, you already mentioned it. It's a noir, you know, specifically neo-noir, as you mentioned in your little snippet in your review, which is great that you picked up on at the time. I guess that's kind of a thing I could throw to you. What do you think defines a noir?
Detective story. You're going to have voiceover narration. You're going to have intersecting plot lines involving multiple characters surrounded by a MacGuffin.
MacGuffin's one I don't have here, but that's a good one.
Well, I mean, look at the Maltese Falcon in the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, of course. That's like the prototypical example of noir, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one, definitely. So as you said, hard-boiled detectives. You said detectives. Hard-boiled is usually the term they throw out.
Yeah, it's the tough guy.
Seedy backdrops, you know, crime is a very big thing. Rough beat police, you know, femme fatales, poverty decline, hubris, you know, these are kind of, they said it's kind of like an evolution of the old sort of, kind of like the romantic kind of stuff. We got these old, Byronic heroes. This is like the evolution of them. These moody, morally difficult men of resolve and pathos, you know, that tended to define the genre, at the time. And it's kind of more like, it's that kind of fun movement where it wasn't set on principles, it just happened to all happen and form this nice little clique where they all kind of look the same, even unintentionally. So that's what's fun about noir. There's lots of little bits you can pick up on. For me, like, I like to keep it really vague because it's really vague. So I say, it's a rough story with rough characters told rough, you know? That's super, super generic. It's a nice way to kind of just categorize everything. It's just the
filmic version of the pulp narrative.
Absolutely. You're right to say pulp, because these are accessible still. Yes. That's the reason why we still talk about noir films. It's the reason why it categorized such a big movement in cinema at such an early time. It was hugely accessible. Everybody could get in on it. And that's why you could watch Casablanca today, and it holds up perfectly. You know, it's a great film, just timeless in its result. Everything it does, and it's a noir as well, you know, it's accessible, and it's kind of, there's more to it contextually, but as a straightforward romance, it's kind of perfect in what it tries to do. And again, on camera, we see a lot of that through, like, you know, shadows is a big thing in noir. It's in the fucking title, noir meaning black in French. It's very easy to see that. So we got evolution of German Impressionism is one of those fun things, you know. So think of Nosferatu and Der Golem. Those are fun, like, creepy, abstract-y kind of films that play heavily with shadows and lighting and difficult to divine sets.
Well, the most popular is Caligari.
Or Caligari, of course. Yeah. But yeah, cool. So anyway, how is Inherent Vice a noir? Let's budge along. Jason?
Voiceover narration.
Good. No, it is. It's as simple as that. It genuinely is. It's got those same tropes we just mentioned. It's got...
Yeah, there's a lot of use of shadows in the film. You're going to be able to see it. I mean, you even talked about it in the car. Even when Doc is peering out the window and he's trying to see if Shasta's there, you'll have that blue tint that's Scorsese, but at the same time, it's Scorsese drenched in shadow, recuperating that noir aspect of it. You'll have the drop-dead gorgeous femme fatale in Catherine Watterson. You're going to have what they call not the gumshoe in this one, but the gum sandal, as he's referred to.
Really? What? Well, wait, explain that.
Because he wears flip-flops.
Oh, that's awesome.
He's the private eye. They call him the gum sandal. Then you'll have the rough cops, and it's actually... when I was reading Inherent Vice, I saw Josh Brolin, I was like, oh, he interpreted the character differently than I did. He actually had the rough edges in his fucking haircut.
Which absolutely.
Kind of cool, you know, and even his shoulder pads on his suit are a little bit squarer than average.
That's fun about his character is he wants to be a gumshoe, and he's got the look of a gumshoe. You know, he's got that real, very square-jawed, tight haircut, and kind of a disheveled, overburdened look, you know.
He kind of looks like Humphrey Bogart, I'll be honest.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. agree with
So,
that.
I mean, he's picking up on old style gumshoe-esque things. So, yeah, there's definitely that. Multiple plots. Who's the MacGuffin?
Shasta Faye.
Shasta's the MacGuffin. Yeah, definitely. She is the Maltese Falcon.
She's a suitcase from Pulp Fiction. She's just
there you go, absolutely.
Not super divine, but drives the plot, at least as far as our protagonist goes. So yeah,
absolutely,
definitely. Absolutely. Those are all perfect. Especially the multi-connected.
I'll say the interconnected plot lines. That's essentially
absolutely.
Not multiple plots, but interconnected plot lines.
They kind of are like multiple plots, though. They got the whole.
They are, yeah. They're just short stories in and of themselves, and you're like, there's more to that story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. We've got a drug story that's divided by CIAs and all that. This conspiracy of neo-Nazis. It's all seedy underbelly. There's our rough background, and there's so many plots.
Oh yeah,
going on at the same time. And we've got our femme fatale. Obviously, we've got Shasta Faye is a modern-ish femme fatale because she lives her own life. She lives by her own rules, and she drives that plot in that same way. The mystery about her, that sort of danger about her, especially as far as Doc's concerned. Well, maybe the rest of the world doesn't see it as dangerous. Doc definitely does, but he's allured to it. That's all super fun, and it's all it's quite noir. Anyway, neo-noir. Let's define it. Okay, so let's take the principles of a noir. Which we kind of roughly defined, and update or subvert them in some way to tell a new story with some similar elements. So an example is Blade Runner, okay? So we've got a story that, and we're not just talking, oh yeah, it's a noir with fucking androids. That's not just it, that would just be a noir with androids, not a neo-noir. That's just that's surface stuff.
Replicants,
that's the word. Thank you, God. So yeah, it takes noir, but it looks at like our existence and moral ambiguity of creating life. This is stuff like sci-fi stuff and deep conceptual sci-fi stuff that has nothing to do with the old noir tropes.
Yeah.
It's taking that style of cinema and using it to evoke more powerful imagery in another medium, That's perfect neo-noir to me. I think that's a great interpretation. That's a great use of neo-noir because you've done something different. And another great use, and I guess it's one that I don't know if people think about it very often. Is Fargo is a great neo-noir. So think of it this way, okay? It essentially flips the focus to villains instead of heroes, but it's still a noir. So instead of spending all the time watching heroes track down villains, we spend villains getting about their job, and in the background, the hero catching up slowly.
Right.
It's a reversal of that, so that's inverting it. Plus, lighting wise, it's a world almost entirely in light. It's bright white. I wouldn't say colorful, but it is definitely harshly bright instead of dark. And we spend more time in dark with the hero who's in her date, and her bedroom, that kind of stuff. It's inversion of that. And it's to show, a desperate man doing dodgy deals in a cheerful and happy place. It's playing with the same vibes, but it's almost the direct opposite of what defined noir. It's just a playful way, and and contrasting that, it's with the terrible tragedy that happens in this kind of peaceful, lovey kind of place.
Yeah,
it tells a different side of noir. It doesn't always have to be seedy for shit to go down. It could, you could be in a perfectly fine place, and there's seedy finds you. That's fun. That's great. Who doesn't love Fargo? But to me, that's neo-noir. So how is Inherent Vice neo-noir? Remember that film we were talking about? So yeah, with those examples, you could probably point to pretty obvious examples of how this film flips the expectations with film noir, because it's a little different. What we're essentially exploiting and subverting here are our expectations regarding how a neo-noir is told, and how we do it is by using tricks. Just a few tricks, okay? So the first one is in media res. Here we have a story that starts right in the middle. What we kind of do as a narrative is we move backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
So a very conventional noir thing is, a detective. He's hard. We learn everything we need to know about him first 5-10 minutes. He's got a tough job, and he's rough, and all that kind of element's still there. But how we apply it is we learn everything about all the other characters at the same time. We expand so far that we build a world rather than build a story.
Right.
So we take the same tricks, that a noir does, but we expand it, we spread it out. So by starting the story with Shasta Faye telling Doc to look for Wolfman, everything else about the story and this man's life is essentially picked up from the past connections and off-screen understandings, so it seems fair to say that we're in the continuing adventures of Doc Sportello, you know. If you put this book on a shelf, you could see the first and second part. This is the first detective story with Doc Sportello. It's not even the last. He's somewhere right in the middle of the chronology of this man. Yep. But at the same time, it's totally separate from the stories we're going to hear, you know. That fun thing, that just kind of pulls away from noir, which usually have a very strict, even if we started with a guy who's well established in his job, we don't usually explore his past so thoroughly. You know, his relationships, and build a missing link that we're constantly grabbing at. And it's Doc who does that, because he's always fascinated with what he used to have. He used to have Shasta Fay. He's always pulling at it. We have to use flashback at one point to even get there, to get an understanding. So, I mean, this story comes after a number of stories, some breakups, this is the middle. And that says neo-noir. Alright, secondly, the slurred and muttered dialogue made of mostly adages, references, and turns of phrase not explained or expected to be understood by the audience. Noir is accessible. That's what we just said. But aside from romance books, you can get a thriller and a detective story on any airport shelf. They are the most easily to get invested in short bursts. They're just fun mysteries that pull you along as a reader, keep you invested for long periods of time. That's why people have such an accessible relationship with them. This is the anti-that. This is a film that doesn't really care whether you follow along or not, and I would argue intends for you not to. Yeah. Because it doesn't want to reward you for doing so, okay? And this is where I'm going to pull back the quote that we were talking about earlier about Benicio del Toro's character and Doc, alright? So here we have this conversation.
Between Sancho and Doc, okay. Just when they've seen the boat, the Golden Fang.
Yeah. So he's getting the tail end of this from Sancho. Here's the conversation where it veers off towards the plot. You know? Right. So he says, the words I'm here, and he slurs, is that the Department of Justice, which we've never talked about, is trying to broker a Vegas deal for him. Who's him? Vegas deal. Where's this coming from? First time we've mentioned it, more or less. And so he nods, you know, as if he understands himself. Mm-hmm. Doc leans in unintelligibly, kind of goes, doesn't compute, something like that. Yeah. Say again. Vegas Wolfman. It ties with your communication breakdown. Doc can't hear him. Yeah. They get interrupted by the lady who comes by with the drinks, which is just good comedy and good timing. It's fun. Yeah. She puts the drinks down. He pulls it to the side.
Yeah. Pulls it to the side, and then he leans right back in.
Leans right forward. It's the least subtle detective work ever. It's fucking hilarious. Sancho leans back in and goes, FBI stuff. They need somebody else on the strip who's not Italian. You dig? So that's not even like do you understand? That's a euphemism for do you understand me? Exactly. You know, that's layered already into even the words for understanding. And then it gets right into what you were saying. Yeah. Like Howard Hughes when he bought the desert in. That's a ref. 9 times out of 10, you're the guy who doesn't get what the fuck he's talking about in that audience. You're just watching. You came here for a stoner comedy. They start talking about Howard Hughes buying the desert. What the fuck, right? And more than that, that's not where Doc questions the miscommunication. He takes it somewhere totally different. Howard Hughes was Italian? It's right off the beaten path. It's a good line. It's fucking hilarious.
But Joaquin, the way he acts it is just perfect too. You can see the confusion.
Yeah, exactly. He acts it all out with his face. It's hysterical. And Sancho he sighs and says, "No, they want white people." So he doesn't even answer. He doesn't really explain any. We just drop the Howard Hughes thing, and he goes on. They want white Anglo owners on the strip. Who better than Mickey Wolfman? Why do they want white Anglo? What does that have to do with it? That's a reference to a contextualized thing that might even be made up. That might just be
the Aryan Brotherhood, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I get that's where that ties in with the plot.
Right.
Eventually, you know, that's why they get. But it doesn't mean anything, you know. It doesn't it doesn't inform Doc. There's no information. This is just all backstory to something that Doc doesn't care about. He just wants to know where Shasta Bay is. And why what happened to Mickey Wolfman because he's related. And instead we get a fucking FBI story about the Anglo politics against Italians in Vegas and the new commerce deals with the neo-Nazis. I mean, like, It's baffling, okay? But so this is just one, like, that segment. I kind of broke it down very slowly, but that conversation is like, it's like 4 or 5 lines, and it's about 10-15 seconds long. I had to play it over and over again just to quote it, because also the entire time they're slurring, they're murmuring. You know, they kind of have little accents that develop on some words. You dig, you know, like, all this is against the idea of noir as accessible cinema. And it's just such a fun it's a fun excerpt to explain it, because there's so much of it. All the film. I mean, at least that one's a fun example. There's piles of ones that just aren't funny. They're not funny and they're not interesting. They're just the same. They're more information. Like, a lot of
Owen Wilson's conversation.
Oh, I was just about to say Owen Wilson's
Coy Harligan's conversation in the bar with Sportello goes on for fucking ever,
and it doesn't mean
like,
a thing. It's all trying to contextualize something, but it's trying not to let you contextualize it. It's just it's feeding you an overload of information to essentially assemble or resemble white noise.
Yeah, and it's essentially what's funny is that when I think that this is key. Anderson probably understands the audience is really listening at this point.
Yeah.
And so what he does, he complicates things by getting them to whisper.
Gets them to whisper, gets a girl to interrupt them, you know, like, that's such simple things, you know. Gets breakdowns in the conversation, they don't even hear each other.
So they break your concentration every time.
Exactly. So you can't follow. That's a perfect example. Anderson definitely knows the tone that it's going for.
Yeah.
That's why it's so effectively communicated throughout. So it's very, very intentional. Okay. Yep. And so obviously, though, that doesn't make it fun. You know, it just makes it intentional. Yeah, but
just want to bitch slap him.
But yes, deterring you from the specifics. That's important to remember. That's what it wants you to do. It doesn't want you to focus. It wants you to generalize. And that's why I'm kind of generalizing. Third point, when it comes to neo-noir, we doubled down on noir expectations so that they become incomprehensible. I wrote this before the conversation that we were just having. Basically explains exactly that. But yes, more examples, I suppose. You know, where's Shasta? Who runs the Golden Fang? Who owns the boat, the Golden Fang? Who killed Bigfoot's partner? Where's Mickey Wolfman? Who killed Glenn Sharlock? Where's Coy? Who is the narrator? How does she know Doc? You know, we kind of get this information eventually, but you really have to be paying attention. But yeah, what does that all mean? And what do we gain from Inherent Vice being a neo-noir? So yeah, it's a neo-noir. So fucking what? Before we can look at that, okay, so again, we have to break it down. That's the whole point of this. We finally have to look at postmodernism. Mm-hmm. So I do have a sort of a quote from a guy called Dragan Milovanovich from the Department of Criminal Justice in Northeastern Illinois University. So this is something I found very readily on the internet because I didn't really want to dig into a book just to find the fucking meaning of postmodernism because I kind of already half knew it. But I think here's a kind of fun way to summarize it by kind of just understanding that what I'm about to say is a bunch of things that modernist thought inherited or eventually became.
Right.
And postmodern, just think of the answer or response to these. And that's you. Here's the quote. Most of the key concepts of modernist thought were critically examined and found to be wanting. Entrenched bureaucratic powers, monopolies, the manipulative advertisement industry, dominant and totalizing discourses, and the ideology of the legal apparatus were seen as exerting repressive powers. In fact, the notion of the individual, the free, self-determining, reflective, and the center of activity, was seen as an ideological construction, nowhere more apparent than in the notion of the juridic subject, the so-called reasonable man in law, rather than the notion of the individual, the centered subject. And then we were going to play with a little bit of entropy here. The postmodernists were to advocate the notion of the decentered subject.
Yeah, perfect definition.
Here's a good catch-all quote if you want to just generalize it, because modernism had make it new.
Yeah.
That was their catch-all quote. Here is postmodernism, sort of summarized by Jean-Francois Lyotard.
Lyotard, yeah. I know where you're going.
Let us wage a war on totality. That's it. That's that catch-all buzzword phrase to try to focus postmodernism around. So essentially, modernism was all about order and establishing definitive terms and structures so that we could best understand life. Yeah. You know, best understand where we are, how we think in life. There was an emphasis on realism, which was a huge art movement and a writing movement.
Yeah.
At the turn of the early 20th century, much in the waves of modernism. And all this was to a fault, argues postmodernists, because most things are in a constant state of flux and can't be readily assigned places. So that's a brief overview, just to give us enough contextualization to talk about a little more about Inherent Vice, but of course there's so much more to read if you're interested even remotely. So we have a loose definition of postmodern. What does it mean for Inherent Vice to be a postmodern neo-noir film? What are we supposed to gain from that? Well, okay, couple of points that I kind of picked up, okay? So we've already kind of touched on it. It's a scathing criticism of specifics.
Right.
So figure the plot is one thing and characters is another.
Yeah.
By blurring specifics in plot in this film, we gravitate towards character. And here we could be asked to try and spend the film not following the whys and wheres, but really understanding the whos. Who is Doc? What is he? He's a hippie detective. A man constantly derided by his peers, adversaries, contacts as a hippie.
Yeah.
He's a drug-dependent man of his time. He's living in his own detective novel. He's a man who absolutely thinks he's cooler and more capable and more suave than he is. And at the heart of it, he's essentially a good man. Yes, money comes last on his priority list. And he's ultimately a man of action in that he returns a husband to his wife and child. You know, he is a positive role model in one very specific aspect of the story, you know. He has an impact on a part of the story, not the whole story, much of it not really directly at all. In fact, you could say the part where he helps Coy reunite with his family. It's mostly because he's bartering for his life after being set up by Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So it's not really spun out of a desire to save Coy. It's actually just happens. It's still good action, but it happens almost accidentally. If it hadn't been mentioned that he had terms to debate for his life, he'd never mentioned Coy. So that's just where he ends up at that point. But even then, he's not, as we kind of looked at, he's constantly backwards looking. His relationship with women is poor or one-sided at best. But what do we gain from that? From looking at where Doc's position in the story is? Well, we could ask ourselves what our place in our own life is. That's one way of looking at it. You know, where do we fit in with the world around us? Do we follow direction blindly? Are we at the beck of others? As Doc often is. They ask him for his help. He just does it. You know, he doesn't say no to a case. Ever. No. Do we help people by being involved in the world around us? Or in general, do we help people? Do we want to be like Doc? That's a direct question from the film. While we relate to him, do we want to be the man who can't fit in? Or it's not so much fit in, but understand, comprehend? Because he's not exactly our hero, and he's not a role model. So from that character study, we can return that spotlight back on ourselves very easily and apply it to the blur, the noise. We can reflect that on ourselves very readily. That we don't understand a lot about the world that we live in. If you look at science, you could gather a general understanding of science, but you don't understand it like a scientist would, you know? You have to find a place with that. You have to find a point where you're happy to be content with not knowing certain things. You have to find a position in life that suits to not know and what suits to know. Doc is very much, he's a hippie. I mean, that means he picked a specific sect of life, a doctrine of rules to live by. And they are positive rules, but here they're played to an extent negatively because he's not willing to change. And by looking at that, we can say, well, maybe we should be willing to change. Now, that again, to clarify, this doesn't make the film more enjoyable, but this is stuff you can learn or even have fun with in reading if you want to be like me, a cool guy. So right, second, kind of ties into that. Society is a weird and shifting place. That's I've just covered that. But let's look at postmodernism in respect to that. Because postmodernism, you mentioned entropy. This is entropy. That is what postmodernism is. Yes. That a continual decline and gradual spiral of society and reality and all things to varying flux and varying states of being and function. Yep. That's entropy. That disorder is what we experience from Doc being in this world. And the world, because the world itself that he's in functions. As I kind of mentioned earlier, this world moves without him. The cogs all turn. And the thing is, it's not a positive world. No. It's a very seedy world. The drug deals take precedence. Everybody's in on it. Even the police, who are, I mean, we all kind of know they very often are represented in real life as a negative force. Yeah. We don't need Inherent Vice to tell us that, but we can even look at the fact that there are good people working in the police in the form of Bigfoot, right, whose work is drying up, family life is falling apart, constantly bothers and harasses the people around him, and he wants to be more, and he might even be implicated in all these drug deals, you know? He actually outright manipulates Doc into examining Adrian Prussia. And, Doc doesn't know why he's there. In the moment, he panics because he realizes, why is he here? And gives the wrong answer. He's not exactly sure. And that then, he just knows he wants to find out more about Puck and the Golden Fang. And he finds it. What's it worth? It's all about a Bigfoot scheme.
Yeah.
And that functions for Bigfoot. And at the end, while he is in disarray and, he swallows the weed on the table, realistically, he functions and he moves on.
Yeah, it's a revenge story in the end.
Oh, yeah, as far as Bigfoot's plot is concerned,
yeah.
Absolutely. Doc says that, I might not be as much into revenge as you guys. He's
exactly.
So that's he absolutely doesn't. He's not a part of that world or plot.
Exactly.
He distances himself from the motives that drive it.
Yeah.
So again, so it's not a positive world, but it's kind of a almost realistic view of the world. It is kind of torn apart. There are multiple shades to every character in this piece. The orthodontist is a drug lord and a pedophile. The concerned father is also a neo-Nazi supporting drug lord himself,
Yeah, Crocker Fenway, Japonica's father.
Exactly, And the other caring father is in deep with the FBI, but he's a saxophonist, or saxophonist. Everybody's got layers, and the ones that we don't understand, Shasta Faye, we don't get much of her layers, but that's intentional because she is the mystery. She ties us to the noir. And Doc,
we don't get much about him either.
Nope. We understand who he is by he's a hippie. That concept exists.
Yeah, it's a dirty hippie.
He's a dirty hippie, and he embraces it. Even if he's shunned for it, and that's cool in itself. But at the same time, we don't get layers to him. He is just driven by getting back with his old lady. So. That to me, that's great. That's an exploration of postmodernism in the world. Narrative without narrative. Inherent Vice is not a film you can't follow. When the good is happening and the bad. When Doc is in trouble or tense or getting closer to finding information. The music swells, his mannerisms change, the scene lighting change. These are general things though. These are not specifics. This is film craft. This is texture. This is mood lighting, This is the information beyond information. This is all subtext. We're somewhere mysterious. How about bead veils? We push through them. We get a baseball bat to the head, but hey, that's what you get for going somewhere mysterious. Or what about fog in the streets?
There you go.
Or we're detached from the person we might love, or the purpose that we've got with them. So we have no sense of closure, which is also a big thing in modernism. A sense of closure, a complete circle. Is a modernist ideal. So how about a scene where you're on a faded looking beach, I should say, with looming dark music as you stare blankly ahead and your lover stares at you, smiling and dancing, and you can't even look at her for more than a second. There's disconnect all in that language. You're tense. How about the camera leers down at you from a position of power in every single scene that Doc sits down at a table, which he does with Bigfoot. And he does with the orthodontist, and he does with the drug dealer, and he does with the Golden Fang. He's always at a table, and he's always being leered down at.
Yeah.
He loses that position of power in every single conversation, and we're being told that by the cinematography.
Yeah. Just look at how they present Shasta. He has no power over her either. Every time she shows up, he's sitting down and she's standing.
Exactly. And she literally crawls over him, naked, free.
Yeah.
And draws him in his brute
rage.
Nature. Yeah, to basically act upon something that just seems inconsistent with his character, but that's just it, because he's basic enough and she can control him.
Yeah.
She's trying to incite that in him because it reminds her of the person who made her more free. It just so happens that person was a neo-Nazi who was exceptionally uncaring as a lover. That's Shasta. She's a fun character.
I wish they could have quoted you in time and put that on the jacket of the film. Like, that's Shasta. She's a fun character. Watch Inherent Vice.
So Anderson expresses each scene with everything you need to know, but the language that we see is broken down is actually being inferred to us just in a medium that we are not attuned to as finely,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's abstract because obviously we found these interpretations of them, especially when it comes to camera and what we see, there's a language to that that's pretty well defined, especially when we're talking about those power plays. And the fact that, as you were saying, this is a simple film, mostly shot reverse shot, that simplicity is very intentional to make sure that we catch the hidden language, and I would say hidden language, the not surface language that Anderson is playing with, or using to tell what's really happening in the story. The point is, this approach to filmmaking, to storytelling, this is to debunk the necessity of narrative in narrative. This is to make sure that we understand that films can be told in so many other ways. And I think it's probably important for filmmakers to know that. And that's why it's probably fun for us to analyze as people who aspire to maybe make films one day properly, is to look at how a film can essentially function without a plot. Now, you might say, well, it wasn't a fun film, or it wasn't a good film, that's
Never
fine.
said it wasn't good.
Oh, I'm not saying you specifically. I mean,
okay, cool.
Like Neil, our lovely guest commentator, hated the film, and he's totally entitled to.
Yeah.
But that's something that we can, if we wish to read into it, if we wish to look at it in the way that the film was trying to get us to look, we can interpret things that are meaningful and important to learn, that informs itself through its themes, and then again in the language that it's committing to, and the story it's trying to tell isn't important. It is there, though, but it's used to the effect to, as I said earlier, it's to push you towards the characters, because it's such an overload of information, Last thing, adaptation. This is a fun way to adapt a novel. This is a great way to. It's almost a critique of adapting novels, because look at it. It takes novel. It takes all the words on the page and just puts it in there to get you the impression that you might get when you. This is like how I read things when we sit down to talk about films and stories. We don't actually just go and sit at a table and then divulge details, divulge entire scene verbatim as if that means something, We actually generalize. That's how we speak to each other. We're doing it now. We do it all the time. This is how critique is formed. To me, it's not something that is perfect for how to tell a story. And in a sense, this is very much critical fiction more than it is a story to enjoy. But at the same time, it definitely imparts information to its viewer that you can still enjoy this. You'll laugh. It's still a comedy, after all. You can find this fun and still not get it. That's what's great about it, because that's what they want you to do. They don't want you to pay attention. And that's just what it's trying to push upon you. So as I said, this is me just scratching surface. This is me generalizing about a film that wants us to generalize. But the point is, I watched it leisurely, I treated it like a book, and sure, the story's pointless, but this fulfilled me in a lot of ways that I don't get from a lot of films, This is the kind of stuff, this is like what I get from reading a good book. The stuff that sticks with you for a long time, that informs how you think, and informs how you approach storytelling, informs even little facets of your life. And that's kind of, a lot of the films we've covered with Anderson so far, they have messages, they have interpretations, they have readings, and I really enjoyed that, but to me, this is what I like more. This messes with the concept of even reading it, and makes me rethink even trying, even bothering. But it's also affirming in that sense, because if you get something, you feel accomplished a little. That's the kind of thing that I don't see often, but I love it when I find it, So, absolutely. That's my bit. Jason, speak, my friend.
Well, I really like what you had to say, and I think that it builds a really necessary theoretical framework to appreciate the film. Because like you said, you watch the film as a novel. Right? Yeah. Because essentially it kind of plays out that way. It's very, very difficult. There is a clear visual language. Like I said, Anderson is clearly communicating something out. And you pointed it out beautifully when you said that the camera angles that are chosen for the characters are necessary to establish what he's trying to do. I think that Anderson has wanted to explore a lot of cultural issues with his films. And I think Inherent Vice, coming out at the time it came out, really spoke to Anderson because of what was going on at the time in the United States. And I think that this was the perfect book for him to adapt in order to explore everything that he's explored before, but do it in a very abstract yet refined way.
Right, okay. Interesting.
And so if we're looking at it from, like I said, a cultural perspective, and if we're going from idealism, pragmatism that we were talking about, There Will Be Blood, from pragmatism to existentialism in The Master, now we've got existentialism that's going to be encapsulated in the hippie movement that is actually going towards, again, capitalism in the characters of Bigfoot and also Mickey, right? But the problem is now this, with the entropy concept, is going to be the two forces that are going to be constantly at battle. Where do people who want to exist as themselves, as Doc wants to be, where do they find themselves in a world where that is in a constant struggle in redefining how they're going to make money, right?
Yeah.
And that is embodied essentially by Shasta, who's in the middle of both these worlds. If we take Shasta and we take her and we interpret it, what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, as a word, okay?
Okay.
The way Doc chooses to interpret Shasta is not the same way as Mickey chooses to interpret Shasta.
Right.
So she's caught in the mix between the old and the new. And this is what we got again, old and new, old and new. And so in a world post-World War II, you know, this whole idea of shell shock and post-traumatic stress, Doc is constantly inebriated. We're living, again, this roaring 20s. But now we've got drugs, we've got LSD, we've got PCP, we've got weed, we've got so many different things. And this has now infiltrated all the way up to businessmen, to cops, to the low scumbags that apparently Doc is supposed to be a part of. But the problem is that the drug itself in Inherent Vice isn't necessarily narcotics. It's the culture. How do they separate themselves? They don't know how to define themselves anymore, and therefore they're going to stay intoxicated in order to kind of just avoid answering those questions.
Yeah.
Now, Pynchon's book came out in 2009, and this is just after the housing bubble collapse of 2008. But it's also at the height of hipster culture. So we have, again, capitalism, but then longing for the past, right? Going back to a rich tradition of values, but hipster culture is defined by not the meaning that those things have, but just the interpretation of what these people associate to them. There is a loss of meaning. The same thing can be said about Tarantino when he's pulling something from a Jean-Luc Godard film. It no longer carries the meaning that it had. Godard was fighting a system of cinema that he was sick of seeing. Whereas Tarantino pulls it and he's like, look what I know. But it no longer carries the political influence that Godard was trying to have.
Yeah.
And so Anderson, you know, if we look at 2009, again, we're at this crossroads between hipster culture and the crash of capitalism, right? Trying to this longing for the past. And then for Anderson to want to adapt this in 2014, 5 years after, okay, we have to look at the themes that Anderson has had in his movies so far. And again, like I said, Anderson, when I was talking about There Will Be Blood, we're talking about transitions. And when I talked about The Master, we're talking about transitions. And I think that Inherent Vice speaks to those transitions again.
Right.
But it also talks about family. Another one of Anderson's really interesting themes. Okay? We have Bigfoot who has a family. And he constantly is pulled back by his wife and saying, hang up the fucking phone, come out for supper. You know, these people are constantly being pulled away from their families in order to do what? To work, in order to provide for their families. So they're swallowed up in the machine again, right? But you'll also have Coy's family, right? Hope. Jesus Christ, could he have chosen a better name? Right? She hopes to see her husband back in her arms. He's a guy who plays the saxophone. And ultimately, Doc has to rely on Hope calling him. Because who is Doc's family? Shasta. The only way he can get her back is by reuniting all the other families. All right? And that speaks directly to Anderson as well. In Inherent Vice, at the core of it is a family, no matter how scattered it is. Even Wolfman goes back to his family in the end.
That's a great way to see that.
But the funny thing is that to me, and I can't project myself into where Anderson's going, but Anderson with Inherent Vice completes his study of the human condition.
Right.
And he does so in a postmodern fashion. He doesn't talk to you directly about it, but he's going to pepper it throughout the entire narrative and let you deal with it.
Yeah.
And what I want to talk about most specifically is the 5 years in between the publication of the novel and the adaptation of that novel. And so in those 5 years, there was a rise in concern for basic human rights. And that has come kicking full force into cultural discourse, especially in the United States.
Definitely.
And one of the main things throughout the entire film is the scandals involving police brutality.
Definitely.
And so if we look in between that period, 2009 and 2014, the one that came out that was the most prominent is the Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2013.
That's great,
right?
Yeah.
And this was as a result of the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Now, in the film, we have Tariq Khalil, right? He goes to see the doctor. He goes to see Doc, who, funnily enough, if he's a doctor, he's called Doc Sportello. He has an office in a fucking hospital. And I think that it's brilliant that Pynchon would have thought of this, that he becomes the doctor society needs to put things straight. It's very interesting that he would actually be literally in
at least he defines himself as that role.
There you go. But I mean, Anderson, in adapting, he cut a lot of what Khalil's character was going to be. And I think that speaks directly to how much Black culture has not had a voice in such a long time. And even if we look at what we were talking about in O.J. Simpson Made in America on the last episode, the Rodney King beating was something they got away with. Trayvon Martin, the same thing. Zimmerman was acquitted from wrongdoing. Right. And I think that the lack of attention that the Black community has received is actually where Tariq Khalil fits in.
I love that. I think that's a great way to see that character, because
and the funny thing is that he's in another movie like you wouldn't believe. He's just there. Oh, there's our black guy. And
absolutely,
then after
he has literally that one scene.
But I think that when they talk about, Khalil, what he says in the film anyway, he says he's talked to the Aryan Brotherhood, so you got the white guys essentially that owe him, and Glenn Sharlock owe him a lot of money. And he went to jail. He goes on to mention that the entire black neighborhood where he was from is gone. It's been completely wiped out, bought by Wolfman's company. And so I think that even that speaks to what people have been doing to minorities. I mean, even Sortilege in the car goes on a little bit of a tirade when she mentions that minorities had been taking their land away from them for so long. I mean, minorities have been having their lands taken away from them for so long. She mentions the Mexicans. She mentions the natives. And then what we magically see once Doc is basically filtering this, because Sortilege to me is a figment of his imagination. We see like she's in the car talking, but when you see the reverse shot from Doc's side, she's no longer sitting in the seat next to him. He essentially heads to the bulldozed place that Tariq Khalil mentions. And what do we see? What's the image that's there? We have the massage parlor, but it's also a loop that leads to two different directions. Either you go right for the fascists, or if you go back to where you're coming from, which is weird. You see this community that's completely destroyed. It's a complete wasteland where Wolfman is going to erect these weird buildings.
Yeah.
Low-cost housing, essentially destroying low-cost housing to re-implement low-cost housing in order to make more money. So essentially building his namesake, his life force, over the top of other people. If that isn't a better image for capitalism, I don't know what is.
Perfect.
So I think that really goes to show that capitalism is that bully. It is also engulfed in police brutality that exploits the totalitarianism that the government will have over minorities.
Yeah.
It's even in the form of dialogue that Bigfoot Bjornsson uses at the end of the film. When he kicks down Doc's door, he says, after a long and busy day of civil rights violations. It's flat out there. That's a sentence in the fucking movie. Whenever Doc bends down, he covers his ass whenever he's in the presence of police. And that's one of the things. It's one of the things that cops used to do to the communities, black people. And Dave Chappelle mentions it very well in one of his shows. He says, whenever you're stopped by officers, they're going to search your ass to see if you're hiding any drugs in there, which is fucking terrible. How many times have you been pulled over by the cops and they said, hey, take off your pants and I'm going to stick
Absolutely no times.
Never. And it goes even farther by showing the show Adam 12, where two cops, including Bjornsson, who's on screen at that point, are talking about ambushing two male Negroes that have possibly on foot. So you have Anderson that's kind of showing a little bit in his own way that things haven't changed at all. And it's a very sad place where we are in time, even with the hipster culture that is trying to define themselves according to the past, but not necessarily knowing where that past comes from, that past used to have a fucking meaning. And that's where postmodernism comes into it. We have lost the meaning of where things are going. And this is where you'll have Sportello and Bjornsson actually becoming doubles in the film. Sportello is what's being left behind, and Bjornsson is what is to come if we don't have the power to change yet. And I thought that it was brilliant for Anderson to kind of have more of a hippie mentality when it comes to interpreting Inherent Vice by saying, aren't we all a big family? Shouldn't we all be acting like Doc? Shouldn't we all just not, like, just, you know what, there's cocaine on the table, just snort it or smoke some weed. Sure. Bill Hicks style, where he's like, you know what? People who smoke weed never get into fights.
But then reality kicks down the door. I mean,
exactly. Reality kicks down the door. And it's a sad reality that we live in. However,
it is definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's very strong. I think it's very important emphasis. It's kind of saying the background of this world, it functions, but it's not good.
No.
You know? And the only inherent good thing, he is old-fashioned. He is of his time, and he's of a very particular kind of person. And he's not ready to change.
And what does that say about Anderson?
That he's absolutely trying to stand for that corner. It just doesn't exist.
There you go. But as a filmmaker as well. If we're looking at the meta-narrative in postmodernism, Anderson is at that crossroads. Where does he go from here?
That is interesting. Although, that's what I mean. The fascination with the postmodern here, and the final note we get for Sportello, it feels like there has to be a middle ground, you know?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That's what I mean. Anderson, this isn't going away. That's what I feel, you know? We have to at least face up to the fact reality is a bit shit and totally corrupt, and we have to kind of fix it. And we can't fix it by getting high and sitting around. We have to be active about it, and we can't be backwards looking, at least forward driving. And if that's the case, then we can look to Sportello and go, yeah, drive the car. You can look back all you want as long as you fucking drive the car.
Exactly. But at the same time, that's where Shasta comes back into play.
You think?
You're talking about reality, right? When she comes back, she's been hit by reality. Has she not?
Yes. Yes.
And in a strange way, you know, if you choose to view the film through this lens, Shasta could be a hallucination. She could be a hallucination of a time that didn't really exist. It's always been that background that you're talking about. Shasta was just an illusion.
Yeah, that's interesting. She's like an idealized middle ground between of the aspirations that Doc wants. So yeah,
it's the innocence that Doc still has.
Yeah, that of course makes her that MacGuffin that drives the plot, yes, but also informs the MacGuffin. She becomes this idealized place where you can both be reflective and based in one living and still be progressive and forward-thinking and help in some degree, or at least adapt in some degree to help.
Yeah.
That the world needs more doctors.
That's exactly right, yeah.
That's great. That's a great reading that really hits like both sides of the head of this postmodernist thought not being fully developed, and that there has to be more. We can't just define it by another definition, you know? That it has to be continually striving towards a middle point where we can be happy with certain stability and at least content to work with the constant flux. So that's fascinating. I think that's the perfect way to read Shasta as well. And Anderson, I also agree. I think you really rounded all those themes out really well.
And the thing is that it also points to one last little thing: the fact that the film is a loop. You know, the way that the opening shot is designed, you'll have the two houses, like I said, going down to a beachfront, and before the epilogue starts, before Bjornsson kicks down the door, you'll have that same shot. Everything between those two shots essentially is that loop. The strange aspect of the loop is that it speaks directly to how these two things we're talking about, you know, the innocence, the idealism that comes with it, capitalism, the intertwinedness that's going to be caught in entropy is this never-ending cycle. And it goes to show just how even the last shot of the film and of Doc and the first shot of the film of Doc are actually kind of mirror images. And funnily enough, he's staring in a mirror. The first shot of Doc is him on his couch looking left. That in film language is him staring out to the past. If you're looking right, it acts as a timeline. If you're looking right, you're thinking of the future. If you're looking left, you're thinking of the past.
It's how we read.
Exactly. And how interesting is it that Shasta comes in frame right as though she's actually coming from the future. He has to look to the future Shasta in order to recuperate the image of her in the past at the end of the film. And she is described by Sortilège when she's mentioning it, and I have it written down here. I'm going to read directly from my notes. Okay, the opening of the book, the opening of Pynchon's book, is verbatim the first words that you hear in the film.
Right.
And Sortilège mentions that what Shasta is wearing essentially is a Country Joe and the Fish t-shirt and a bottom half of a flower print bikini. You know, that was Shasta in the past. When she shows up to see Doc in the beginning, she is wearing something that she swore she never would look like. That's exactly what Sortilège says. However, when Shasta comes back at 1 hour and 40 minutes in the film, so essentially at the end of the second act, she is wearing the Country Joe and the half bottom print of the bikini. So Doc essentially, we could say that this is a hallucination now that she might have actually come back to who she was, or is she literally back to the reality, the place that she wanted to be as an individual before actually going back into the world?
Yeah. Well, that's fun. I mean, you could even look at what they say. Of course, they're not back together.
No, exactly. He says that.
The past isn't recaptured. So what Shasta could be doing is teasing, pulling, using the effects of the past to drag Doc into the future, you know?
Exactly. And that's why I think that the opening shot of Doc on the couch looking left really, really is important, and looking in how he stares in the mirror, in the rearview mirror at the end of the film, is to show that Doc, again, is that loop, right? Mm-hmm. And the loop to me is encapsulated very, very clearly in the long crab left shot on a dolly that they use to show between the palm trees, Doc and Sancho that are walking left when the boat is being dragged back to shore. You know, Doc was looking out the window, and that Scorsese lighting I was talking about, he's looking out the window with his binoculars. There's that blue lighting that you can have in I think it was in Goodfellas, if I'm not mistaken. He uses it in a couple of films. I think he uses it in After Hours as well. There's very clear blue lighting. He's looking through his binoculars, and then you'll have another shot of Shasta who's staring. And she's in red, you know, so you'll have desire in red and you'll have longing, the blues essentially in blue, right? You know, this idea of nostalgia that's going to be encapsulated. So Anderson is very much aware of what he's trying to do with that. When he comes and he bookends with that beautiful shot of him staring in the rear view mirror, when he comes and he uses that crab left shot of the boat that Shasta was on, bringing it back to the past. It's like him dragging his past back, but he's also dragging Sportello back to his initial point in the film and how he viewed Shasta, right? She's no longer corrupt, and him driving away going forward is, like you said, is Shasta, she's kind of pushing him forward, but he's also staring back. But I think that crab left, that very, very carefully crafted shot of moving left is kind of like a videotape rewinding, bringing us back to the beginning of the film to close the loop.
That's great. And I like what it says about Anderson, because the Scorsese, the Kubrick, the Altman, it's all there.
Yeah.
He's using Shasta and the boat. The past is all there, but he's dragging us, the viewer, into the future. Exactly. That's what. So if
he's dragging us into the past.
Well, but he's teasing the past to drag us into the future. That's what I mean.
Yes, sorry. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so he's toying with what our expectations of him are, you know, and he's playing with his own influences to the point where we all spot the connections, but
they're communicating something
it's
different.
all to a new aim, exactly, you know. We are dragging slowly towards a new direction regarding Anderson, and that's, if we're going to pot shot where we might be going next, it's that distant, unknown future, where we're the influences might be there to tease us along, but very much this, to me, felt like a goodbye. You can never leave your past behind. I think that's what's fun about the end. Yeah. But at the same time, you can definitely double down on the future.
Yeah.
And that's what's, I think, a pretty interesting, an exciting way to see what happens next, because we could be all wrong. But it's fun. I have fun looking at stuff like that.
And I mean, it's kind of fun because I think that even the last lines is like, we're not really back together, are we? Well, we're not necessarily back together. I think that's a very interesting on-the-nose reference to film noir where he actually gets the girl. But now he's like, well, he kind of gets the girl, but not really.
Kind of, yeah, you know?
Yeah. And I think that...
Not together.
I think it's, in a way, you can interpret those lines, again, going back to words, as Anderson apologizing in a sense. Are we going to be okay after this? Is this going to be us? Are we going to
Yeah. That's perfect. Definitely.
Chiding the audience a little bit.
I'm sorry I made Inherent Vice. It was for me.
It was for me. You guys can watch it if you want.
I tried to bring a few of you with me, but you know what?
Exactly.
This film is not for you.
Yeah, I'm driving away now. I'll look back at what I did.
Look,
but
I've already made your
way.
films.
Exactly. Let me do mine.
Yeah.
You know, and then we're Shasta sitting next to him going like, what the fuck?
What better way to round it up than to kind of ominously look to the future by staring at the past? That's great. So I'm quite happy to put a little nip on the bud that is Inherent Vice and progress away from Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
A couple of months.
Yeah, so obviously we with this film, it's only the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. There's so much left to talk about. So
all those, that overabundance of information is still information. You can use it. If you want to go there, you want to dig it. I mean, what Jason said about contextualizing the particular space in which these films are made and the era that the film frames, there's a treasure trove there alone that we teased, but like there's essays upon essays waiting to be read and reinterpreted right there. So knock yourselves out if you're that kind of listener.
Yeah, so don't be too hard on us if ever you guys are like, you guys didn't talk about this. Yeah, we get it. How about you talk about it? And we'll be happy to indulge.
Absolutely.
And I think that, this one's Inherent Vice is a tricky way to end the season.
I feel like we've ended on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it's good because this is the end of season 1.
Yeah, the end of season.
The cliffhanger, we're teasing season 2.
Yeah, which is going to start in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be pushing our release date not to February 1st, but to February 8th. So our discussion of M. Night Shyamalan's Split and The Village is going to be in 2 weeks' time, just so that we can set ourselves up for what we wanted to do, like we were talking about in the beginning of the show. So, how do we end this? You want a couple of shout-outs to give there, sir?
Fuck. Oh, no. Okay, from this point onwards, listener, I'm going to make a small list of people in the week that I've talked to, because I've talked to a lot of people each time, and each time I forget to thank people for speaking to me specifically. I also never write down the name. So, you guy who gave me comments on my La La Land review on the blog, thank you. I think your name was Steve. Thank you. You have your own blog. I would love to have shouted that out. Maybe another time. And the usual crowd, I guess. But you have listed, so you can go into that.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody who sent in an audio clip to us. JD Duran from In Session Film, thank you so much. Neil Ramji, I loved what he had to say and all that. The same thing for Hermione. We're still in the works for getting her on the show. I really wanted her take on a couple of films. We haven't really pinpointed anything yet. Andrew is brilliant. I've had so much fun talking with Andrew so far that I want to give a big shout out to Mike from War Machine vs. Warhorse. We've been chatting quite a bit. It's been quite fun. So I want to big shout out to Ashley Davis as well.
Al Robinson, the Nerd on Nerd guys. They listen to our top 10.
Exactly.
Obviously In Session and Matty Nags and so on. They always get back to us and tell us how lovely we are. So that's amazing.
And Sheila, we really hope that you listen to this, because it's going to be an ongoing thing from now on, which you heard at the beginning of the show. So big shout out to you, my dear. And sorry for missing out on the top 10. But now we have your blessing, I hope, for keeping to mentioning you. You're going to be the thing that starts our show every fucking time.
Thanks, Sheila.
So on that note, my name was Jason Michael. You can find me at film_faculty on Twitter. You can also check out my film review blog site thing, where I haven't posted since Arrival. I'm still working on stuff. I say the same thing every time. Keep listening to the show, guys. You guys were having so much fucking fun with this.
Follow him on Twitter. Great. He is always on Twitter, and he will talk right back to you. So he's a very
all the
friendly
time.
chap.
I answer everyone. Thank you very much. Yeah, so if you guys want my take on something, or if you just want to chat for a fun time.
You want fun time? Chat up Jason Michael on Twitter.
Exactly. And now to you, sir.
So my name's Lee Brady, writer-in-chief of Big Picture Reviews, with my crack team of unprofessional journalists, and you can definitely check us out at bigpicturereviews.co.uk. You can also follow me on Twitter at BigPicReviews. Now, not that I'm less friendly on Twitter, but I am less active. So go for Jason first if you want, and he'll drag me into conversations. That's tends to be how it happens. And I'll retweet stuff when I see it, and that's just how that happened. But yeah, absolutely, give us a follow. Thank you for listening to the show.
Cool. So that's it for us for Season 1 of the Atlantic Screen Connection. Buckled up at 20 episodes. Season 2 is next. Season 2, Episode 1 is going to be up in 2 weeks, where we're going to be talking about M. Night Shyamalan's Split, as well as touching on The Village a little bit.
And some exciting themes that we're hopefully going to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to that. You guys got a little snippet of what I could uncover in the last, like, just off the top of my head. And so that's it for us. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.